lot of people get keto wrong. They think it's an unlimited amount of healthy fat. I like to remind people that ultimately we want to burn what we have as opposed to burning what we eat. So eating a stick of butter or 5 avocados a day is not per se going to get you to where you need to be. When we choose to break a fast, what we choose to break our fast with has a tremendous impact on how our body effectively utilizes stored energy. If you can manage 2 specific hormones, you can master your metabolism, insulin and glucose. The governing philosophy was that we're all the same. I'm here to remind everyone that we're very different, men versus women. Women 35 and under, if you are a lean, athletic woman, I don't want you fasting regularly. Fun fact, men replenish sperm every 72 hours. Women, we are born with a finite amount of ovaries. We're not making as much. So it might show up as irregular cycles, anxiety, depression, sleep issues, very heavy, I used to call them crime scene periods, weight loss resistance. This can all be a byproduct of these hormonal fluctuations. In our culture, we're conditioned to believe more is better. More fasting, more exercise, more food restriction. And I'm here to tell you it is completely the opposite.
The benefits of fasting, do they come from eating less often, or do they come from eating less? Welcome back. Today, we have session 4. What is going on, 3%ers? Who's ready for some intermittent fasting with the amazing Cynthia Thurlow? Welcome back. Yesterday was amazing with Dr. Eric Berg. What a session that was. Today is with Cynthia Thurlow. How women and men can pair keto and intermittent fasting together for amazing results. And we're going to bring her on shortly. We also have a couple of big giveaways. This is going to be an amazing session. Make sure you have eliminated distractions. You have a pen and paper ready. We're going to give you some actionable items here to really transform your health. One of the things that we're going to cover today with Cynthia is that the benefits of fasting, but there's also, you could do too much fasting. And one of the key macronutrients that we're going to discuss today is getting enough protein. We'll discuss the differences between animal-based protein and plant-based protein, and how to fit that in your eating window when you're practicing fasting, which is a challenge because you have your fasting window, your eating window, etc. So I see Cynthia's beautiful face in the studio. I'm going to bring her on with a proper introduction. This morning, Cynthia, I was on my phone trying to get as many images as possible that we have together, some photos that we have together, and I found a whole bunch. And I was like smiling, putting this together this morning. I'll go through each of these. Right, top left here was Keto Salt Lake City, Utah. That's Cynthia. In the middle there, that's me. That's Dave Feldman, Dr. Berry, and a few others. And then bottom left here was actually about a year ago in Low Carb Denver. Richard Johnson in the middle there, and me and Cynthia on the bottom left there. In the middle here, this was Keto Symposium in New York City, September of 2022. Top right, KetoCon. And then really top right and bottom right, that was actually just a couple months ago here we recorded an in-person podcast. So I got to tell you, Cynthia is a dear friend of mine. I love her very much. I learn from her all the time. She inspires me. She's helping so many people. She has an amazing podcast called the Everyday Wellness Podcast. Everybody subscribe to it. She has an incredible YouTube channel, Cynthia Thurlow on YouTube. Subscribe to her channel. She has a viral TEDx talk. I don't know how many millions of views it has. I know it has at least 10 million, maybe 12 million plus. And she has this book called The Intermittent Fasting Transformation. It's a 45-day program for women to lose weight, stubborn weight, improve hormonal health, and slow aging. I want that too as a man. So without further ado, here is the beautiful Cynthia Thurlow. Hello, Cynthia.
Thank you, my friend. I've been looking forward to this conversation it was interesting. I was trying to get my camera to work. So your little impromptu collage of photos allowed me to figure out why my camera was not properly enabled. So it's good to be back in front of your community.
Yes, our community loves you. I love our collaborations and a lot to cover. So let's get right into it. We haven't really, during this 5-day challenge, this is day 4, we've covered, ketosis. Yesterday we had Dr. Berg and it was a great session. We had some students. We haven't really taken a deep dive into fasting. Alina talked about the benefits of fasting for gut health on Tuesday, but I want you to take a deep dive into why you use fasting as one of your protocols for many, many years and what it does to shift us away from burning sugar and burning glucose and these metabolic conditions we see, and how fasting is such a powerful tool to reverse these conditions and shift us into a fat burning energy system.
Yeah, I think it's such an important point for people to understand why fasting is so beneficial. And it has a lot less to do with the changes in body composition and weight loss that so many people really do fixate on. And I say that non-pejoratively. It's just that's a common reason why people come to intermittent fasting. It was certainly how I came to intermittent fasting many years ago. But when I think about our modern day lifestyles and I think about the information that many of us were trained in, we have subjected ourselves to over the years, that we eat to stoke our metabolism. Breakfast is the most important meal of the day. We have to eat snacks and mini meals because that's what stabilizes our blood sugar. And when you really think about our modern day lifestyles and even looking at photos, like I posted a photo, I think on Twitter, which is now X, a few weeks ago, and it was a photo from the 1970s. So many of you watching may or may not have been alive at that time. I was. And I was struck by how different people looked. And that had a great deal to do with the different types of foods we were eating back then, and the meal frequency, and the fat phobia had not yet really fallen into vogue as it did in the 1980s. And so when I think about fasting, it is helping people get reacquainted with the way that our bodies are designed to function optimally, meaning that until about 100 years ago, food was scarce. People starved. I mean, in westernized countries, people starved without food. And yet now we are in a position, because of the processed food industry, because of demand, that we have food accessibility all the time. It's generally from hyper-processed foods. I think the last statistic I read was that 70% of us, most of our diets are comprised of hyper-processed foods. And that's kind of probably overwhelming to this community and my own. But understanding that most of us, from the moment we get up in the morning until the moment we go to bed, we are consuming food-like substances, and we are eating to the detriment of our metabolism, to the detriment of the health of our cells. I know Ben talks a lot about cellular health and cellular rejuvenation and healthy cells and what those are comprised of. So when I'm lecturing on fasting as one example, a lot of what I choose to focus in on is helping people understand that when your body can use both fats and carbohydrates efficiently, this is how our bodies are designed to thrive. They are not designed to run just on carbohydrates. They are not designed, in many ways, they're designed to be efficient. It's almost like, if you think about it, you have a sports car, and if you hit the gas to go really fast, really quickly, we can think about it the same way when we use carbohydrates in our body. I mean, we deplete stored sugar, but then after we've done that acceleration, what our body should optimally be utilizing is fats. And that's, sorry, my phone is talking to me.
Is that Siri?
Yeah, it's Siri. And so I'm laughing. I'm like, no, let me just make sure I turn that off, because that shouldn't be happening. Sorry about that, guys. But helping people understand that, much like a car, in terms of efficiency, in terms of fuel efficiency, our body should be able to flex between utilizing stored carbohydrates or stored fat as a fuel source. And the way that we do that is by training our bodies. We really do have to get back to basics. And that means we eat the right combination of macronutrients at a meal. That usually is going to talk about protein as being very protein centric, and understanding that, yes, you can have carbs at the meal. I'm a huge proponent of healthy carbs, from vegetables or healthy fats. But helping people understand that what stabilizes our blood sugar is protein. It is not the carbohydrates. And so when we start restructuring our meals, we can help with stabilization of that blood sugar. We can get to a point where we can go longer periods of time without eating. As we go longer periods of time without eating, we're effectively allowing our bodies to utilize stored energy as a fuel source. And Ben, I know we both talk about the fact that a lot of people get keto wrong, in the mindset of they think it's an unlimited amount of healthy fats. And I like to remind people that ultimately we want to burn what we have as opposed to burning what we eat. So eating a stick of butter or 5 avocados a day is not per se going to get you to where you need to be, but being conscientious about our fat portions is certainly something that I know we both advocate for. So helping people understand when we choose to break a fast, even if it's just 12 hours of digestive rest, what we choose to break our fast with has a tremendous impact on how our body effectively utilizes stored energy. And if anyone has ever been in a position where you can only go an hour or two in between meals, you get hangry, you're grumpy, you feel like you're running out of gas, you're really struggling with weight loss resistance. More often than not, that is a sign that your body is not effectively utilizing stored fat as a fuel source. And the other piece of this that I think is so important for people to understand, whether you fast or not, 12 hours of digestive rest, in my clinical opinion, should be the minimum we go between meals. So maybe you eat dinner at 6 o'clock at night, you don't eat breakfast till 6 a.m. I don't know how many of you like to eat breakfast at 6 a.m. I'm definitely not one of them. But 12 hours of digestive rest, even my athletic teenage sons can go 12 hours. And that allows our bodies to optimize digestion, stabilize blood sugar. And for many people, that can be a really good starting point. So when asked the question about how do we understand the physiology of our body so that we can optimize not only digestion, but our metabolism, is really starting with the basics. And it really goes back to try to go longer in between meals. Make sure you're putting your meals together in a way that is going to set you up for success. And by that, I mean, don't sit down and eat a pound of potato chips and half gallon of ice cream. That is not going to set you up for stable blood sugar. You're not going to feel good. It may feel good momentarily, but you will not feel good a little while later, versus having a steak and broccoli, having chicken and a salad, having a piece of fish, having hard-boiled egg, having an omelet. All those things are going to help you get to a point where you can go longer in between eating. And I will lastly just justify that we should not be snacking. I know this isn't a popular opinion. Sometimes people will tell me I'm like a wet blanket, and I accept that. But really, if we're putting our meals together properly, we don't need to snack in between meals, because snacking in between meals has the potential to evoke an insulin response. And I know that probably many of the other experts that have spoken this week have probably talked a lot about these key hormones, glucose, insulin. And it's interesting. I was listening to a podcast this morning, Ben, and there was a physician talking about if you can manage two specific hormones, you can master your metabolism. And I know you won't be surprised to hear his two hormones that he said you got to master: insulin and glucose. And we know, based on research, based on me working with hundreds of thousands of people, you working with lots and lots of clients, if we can help teach you how to balance your blood sugar and manage that insulin response. And remember, insulin is not a bad hormone. It's gotten a bad rap because of our modern day lifestyles. If you can manage those two hormones, you got a lot to work with. You can, work backwards on all the other things, but it really is getting down to foundational principles. And the last thing I'll just tie into that, for anyone that's watching this that is struggling with weight loss resistance, you're like, I don't know why this has happened, especially for women north of 40. My heart goes out to you. I know what that's like. Helping people understand the interrelationship with poor sleep and dietary choices and blood sugar dysregulation, chronic stress. We're now 4 years since the beginning of the pandemic, and I cross my fingers that we never live through anything like that ever again. The amount of stress that all of us have experienced over the past 4 years is unlike anything we've ever experienced in our lifetimes. So understanding that chronic stress, chronic high cortisol impacts blood glucose, impacts insulin, got to dial in on those two things. So if you're, listening to this and you're saying, I'm already intermittent fasting, I'm doing all the right things, I would say start with the foundational principles, and you will generally end up having much better results than someone that is over fasting, not sleeping, chronically stressed. We know a lot of these people, right? I have some family members and some friends. I'm always encouraging them. I was like, do the things you don't want to do, whether it's meditation, whether it's grounding work, whether it's backing off on the intensity of your exercise. Ultimately, telling our autonomic nervous system that we're not being chased by a saber-toothed tiger is beneficial to our mental health as well.
A lot to unpack right there. The key lessons that Cynthia just shared already, pure gold. First of all, number one, when you change the composition of the macronutrients in your meals, it makes it a lot easier to skip snacking, to practice intermittent fasting, and start off with that 12-hour fasting window. One of the questions we get asked all the time, Cynthia, is does my sleeping window include my fasting window? And the answer is yes. Use that as your fasting window because you're asleep. So to Cynthia's example, if you're done eating by 6 p.m., that last bite of food, you'll go to bed that night, wake up the next morning, and when you eat at 6 a.m., if you eat that early, that's a 12-hour fast. You're using your sleeping window. And that should be so doable as long as the composition of the meals you're having, that breakfast, lunch, and dinner, are fat and protein focused, not necessarily carbohydrate focused. But even before that, what you just said at the end, the fundamentals can't be skipped. They're called the fundamentals and the foundation because that is what builds everything else. Fasting, keto, these are all really amazing tools. Red light therapy, cold plunging, amazing tools. But if the fundamentals, the foundation is not strong, it's just not going to get you to where you want to get to. So the foundations are sleep and stress, getting quality sleep, mastering your stress levels, turning off the news, taking your daily dose of vitamin G, which, by the way, they don't know what vitamin G is yet. I'm going to share it tomorrow, so don't give it away, Cynthia. But adding your vitamin G, which I'll talk about tomorrow. And then once you start pairing keto and fasting, everything works so much better. The expert who said 2 hormones, glucose and insulin, to focus on, cool thing about that is keto and fasting, work really well for both of those factors. So, hey, I want to just briefly interrupt the video you're watching to share something with you. One of my favorite companies that I use for health and longevity and biohacking is a company called Bond Charge. And they have a whole range of incredible products, including the blue light blocking glasses you see me wear right now. But one of my favorite products from them is an infrared sauna blanket. That's right. You don't have to spend a ton of money investing in a sauna or spending so much time driving to a facility with the sauna. They actually created a sauna blanket that you could use in the comfort of your own home. And I use this all the time. Why would we want to even do a sauna? Well, there's a lot of research and a lot of studies showing the benefits of infrared sauna. The sauna blanket works by raising your heart rate to a workout or a training session. So you burn more calories while you're actually lying down and relaxing. You could burn up to 600 calories in one single session. Also, it's going to cause you to sweat. And one method of flushing out toxins from your body is through sweat. There's also one of my favorite benefits, this endorphin release, endorphin rush you get from using a sauna blanket. And every time I get out of the sauna blanket, I feel like I just got a 60-minute massage. And that's because of the endorphin benefit from it. So how this works differently than a regular sauna is that it works by using infrared light, which heats the body directly rather than the air around you like a traditional sauna. This means you get the same benefit at a lower heat. So it's easy to set up. It's super convenient. 30 to 40 minutes will suffice in terms of the length of the sessions. And you do that 2 to 3 times a week, you're going to feel amazing. Add that to your keto fasting protocol and watch what it does for your results. You could do it while you watch TV. You could do it while you read a book. I do it while I listen to an audiobook. So if you want to learn more about the Bond Charge products, including the sauna blanket, head over to bondcharge.com/KetoCamp. And if you use the coupon code KetoCamp at checkout, you'll get 15% off your sauna blanket. And actually, any of their products are 15% off with that code. Bond Charge hooked you up. So head over to that domain or click the link down below and go get your Bond Charge products. All right, let's get back to today's video. What would you say, Cynthia? Because I know somebody watching might be in this situation or they might know somebody in this situation. How would you coach this and share your tips on this? When I don't eat every 2 to 3 hours, like I go hypoglycemic, and my nutritionist, my dietitian, my personal trainer, my whatever told me to snack because my blood sugars are dropping too low and I got to keep it high. How do you coach them on that?
Well, first of all, I like them to understand that hypoglycemia is a step in the wrong direction. It means that the receptors on your cells are not properly being regulated. So I always think back to when I was first a nursing student many years ago, and we thought hypoglycemia, which is low blood sugar, was pretty benign. And then I learned otherwise, that it is just one of many signs that you have some degree of cellular resistance to the effects of these hormones. So when someone is, number one, articulating they have a fear of experiencing this degree of hypoglycemia, we go back to the basics of making sure they understand how to structure their meal. So are you having 30 grams of protein in that meal prior to that episode of hypoglycemia? And more often than not, they're not. So I find women in particular do a really crummy job of not eating. They undereat protein unknowingly because we've been conditioned to believe that women are meant to have petite little meals. And I remind them all the time, that's a surefire way to contribute to a lot of metabolic health issues. So number one is, let's reflect back on on the meal you ate prior to this episode. Number two, I'm completely fine when someone is new to intermittent fasting or the concept of intermittent fasting, that there are little hacks. There are things like MCT oil, which is processed very differently in the body than other types of fats. Now, the challenge with MCT oil is there's a dose response curve. So I find that maybe Ben can get away with 2 tablespoons and I need a teaspoon. But a teaspoon of a healthy fat used in between meals, if you are prone to hypoglycemia, can be a way to address this. It is not orange juice. It's not a hard candy. It is not eating, what did someone tell me the other day? Orange juice, hard candy. This is what their endocrinologist, that's a specialist in dealing with diabetes, or to eat a muffin when they have these episodes. And I said, that's probably not the advice that I would give. I probably would say have a piece of fruit with a piece of protein. Maybe that's the way. If you need something that's handy, but you definitely don't want to be, you don't want to look at orange juice as a stopgap mechanism. So generally, Ben, when women, because I work predominantly with women, when women express this concern, I almost always will say, let's reflect back on what you last ate. Let's then reflect on what can you have that's transportable with you if you start to feel that way. And that's where healthy fats. Now, the challenge is we are a nation, we love nuts. We love nuts. We really love nut butter, and peanut is not a nut. So let me just be clear.
Yeah.
Peanut butter in my house is king. My husband and my younger son love peanut butter. It's like an art form. Total art form. Have you ever heard of Big Spoon Roasters?
No.
Okay, they're based out of North Carolina, small batch. Check them out. They've got a crunchy peanut butter that is like ridiculous.
Yeah, it's dangerous. I should probably stay away from that. That's my trigger food.
I bought one for each, my husband and my son, and I just said, good luck. You get one jar, and then you're done, because they have to moderate. But I do find that healthy fats, now let me be clear, I'm not saying go have 2 scoops of nut butter, because it's really easy to overeat. That's why I like MCT oil. It's processed differently, completely differently than other types of fats. It's a medium chain triglyceride. It is, I actually have conversations with a colleague of mine who feels like MCT oil can kind of get a free pass, meaning it's pretty hard to overdo it with MCT oil minus the GI effects. It's hard to overdo it. Whereas like avocado is easy to overeat, nuts are easy to overeat, nut butters are easy to overeat. So that's typically my recommendation. Reflect back on your meal. Let's change it up next time. 30 grams of protein, add in some MCT oil. Again, being cognizant of portions. Like I literally will do a teaspoon and I'm totally fine with that. But for some people, they'll add that to a coffee. They'll add that to tea as they're trying to bridge that gap of going from being less metabolically efficient to becoming more metabolically efficient. And the last thing that I want to say to this is, you did not become hypoglycemic overnight or insulin resistant overnight. For a lot of men and women, they get very impatient. They expect that they should be able to go from metabolic inefficiency to efficiency in like one day. That's not how it works. I think most people take 1, 2, 3, 4 weeks. If you're really not metabolically healthy, it could take longer. And please, please, please give yourself the gift of time. If you're really struggling, don't beat yourself up. Don't compare yourself to anyone else. Reach out for resources, but understand the more metabolically unhealthy you are, the longer it's going to take to be able to get your body to a point where you can utilize stored fat as a fuel source and be able to flex between, I know that's one of Ben's words, flex between using carbohydrates or fats as a fuel source.
Fantastic advice there. I love the MCT oil tip, and you're right. Go low and slow with that. You don't want to get some stomach distress and be sent to the bathroom. Powders might work better than the liquids for some people as well, but you're right. I could do a tablespoon or two of some powders and I'm totally fine. But if I go more than that, then I'm sent to the bathroom as well. Coconut oil could be a good option too, although it's not 100% MCT. There's a percentage of MCTs in it. And the cool thing about medium chain triglycerides, a lot of benefits, like you said, it's kind of like a free pass. But the reason it is the liver doesn't have to produce bile to break it down. It goes right into your cells. The mitochondria use it efficiently. It could help with ketones, especially caprylic acid, the C8 variety. So you could put it in your coffee. You could just take a tablespoon or a teaspoon of it. There's certain different ways to do it, but definitely we don't want to have hard candies and these sugar-rich protein bars that most doctors, unfortunately, are recommending. But hypoglycemia is a problem, to your point. It is a result of metabolism that is inflexible. And it could be, you could overcome it. It might take a week to several weeks, but it can be overcome while getting fat adapted and doing some intermittent fasting. So on the topic of intermittent fasting, Cynthia, you have a book, of course, called Intermittent Fasting Transformation. You work with a lot of women on fasting, and I'd love for you to distinguish the difference between how somebody who's a man, like myself, versus a woman who's menstruating or postmenopausal, how they all practice this amazing tool differently.
Yeah, it's such an important question because back when I first started intermittent fasting and I read our mutual friend, Dr. Jason Fum's book, the governing philosophy was that we're all the same. Well, I'm here to remind everyone that we're very different, men versus women. I would say, to make it easy, menopausal women and men are more similar in that there's less hormonal fluctuation day to day, week to week. So I'll just put them in their own little bucket. Women 35 and under, if you are a lean, athletic woman, I don't want you fasting regularly. In fact, I typically will say to my younger female patients, if you are in the beginning stages of your menstrual cycle, which is when estrogen predominates, the follicular phase, thinking about a pristine, like let's just say clockwork 28, 30-day cycle, day one is a bleed day up until ovulation. That's when most women can get away with a bit of fasting. Now, if you're already lean and athletic, less is more. It might be that maybe 1 or 2 days a week, you might do a 12, 13, 14-hour fast. I am not a fan of lean, athletic women doing a lot of fasting because our bodies are exquisitely sensitive to nutrient depletion. Even if we are choosing not to have children at that time or at all, our bodies are still exquisitely sensitive to nutritional cues. So that's one subsect. Then we have women who are under the age of 35 who are not metabolically healthy, whether they have PCOS, they're already insulin resistant, or diabetic. These are women who really need a bit of fasting. And so again, the same applies. If they have regular cycles, follicular phase when estrogen predominates, usually the first 2 weeks of their cycle, they can get away with quite a bit of more intense exercise if they do a carb restriction, a bit of fasting. After ovulation, as they get closer to menstruation, it gets a little more challenging, but they can still do 12 hours of digestive rest. And I would actually argue, for anyone who's listening who's ever been told they have polycystic ovarian syndrome, PCOS, the hallmark of PCOS is insulin resistance. Not enough women are being told this. They're about 25% of women with PCOS have a thin phenotype, meaning they're thin. They get missed all the time. Obese women that are younger that have PCOS, they're oftentimes not told, oh, by the way, what's at the basis of this is inflammation, oxidative stress, and insulin resistance. And so there's many, many years of issues that can arise. And interestingly enough, I'm just going to dovetail this. I just interviewed Dr. Peter Attia's head lipid specialist, Dr. Tom Dayspring. Amazing, amazing. He was talking about women that are at risk for future heart disease. You know who some of those women are? PCOS, gestational diabetes, women that have high blood pressure during pregnancy, women that are insulin resistant. So I just want to kind of curve that in there. So, younger women, whether they're lean, less fasting, if they are insulin resistant or they have diagnoses suggestive of insulin resistance, a bit more fasting, again, attuned to their menstrual cycle. Now, women 35 to 50, average age of menopause here in the United States is 51. Women that are 35 to 50, special time in our lives. I say special, I'm going to put in air quotes. Perimenopause, the 10 to 15 years preceding menopause. This is when all bets are off. Everything that used to work for you no longer works in most instances. I was certainly one of those people. This is when stress management and sleep become critically important. If you can't manage those two things, please do not add the hormetic stress of intermittent fasting. Dial in on those first. You'll thank me later. When I think about women at this age, same things apply about their menstrual cycle. So follicular phase, you can get away with a bit of fasting, provided you're sleeping and managing your stress. After the ovulatory period, when progesterone levels are starting to rise, this is when a little less fasting is beneficial. It doesn't mean you can't go 12 hours of digestive rest. And certainly the 5 to 7 days preceding your menstrual cycle, this is generally when I'm recommending that women reduce their fasting hours entirely. Maybe they're doing 12 or 13 hours. The challenge with perimenopause, and a lot of women I know in Ben's community and my community, it's like everything that used to work no longer works, as I said, and all of a sudden we have to exercise differently. So you're doing more strength training and less HIIT, less Orange Theory fitness, less CrossFit, because your body is less stress resilient. Your body's making less progesterone. Fun fact, men replenish sperm every 72 hours. Women, we are born with a finite amount of ovaries. So our ovaries are what help produce progesterone and estrogen, etc. The hallmark of early perimenopause is that the progesterone in our ovaries, we're not making as much. So it might show up as irregular cycles, anxiety, depression, sleep issues, very heavy, I used to call them crime scene periods. Weight loss resistance. This can all be a byproduct of these hormonal fluctuations. So when I talk about this lack of stress resiliency, it is not that you are incapable. It's that your body is changing. So these are the women that I will sometimes speak to. And unfortunately, in our culture, we're conditioned to believe more is better. More fasting, more exercise, more food restriction. And I'm here to tell you it is completely the opposite. You have to be kind to your body. So that's kind of in a nutshell. Depends on where you are in your cycle. Make sure your sleep is dialed in. Make sure you're consuming anti-inflammatory nutrition. Maybe you got away with pizza and ice cream in your 20s and 30s. That all changes. I don't say this to sound like a wet blanket, but I think it's important to just acknowledge that as we're getting older, our diets need to change. Our nutrition needs to change. Anti-inflammatory nutrition becomes very important. I know Ben and I both share the trait that we don't drink alcohol. And that's been a choice that I've made largely due to sleep, because sleep is so important to me. But things like alcohol and sugar, and for individuals, specific individuals, maybe dairy no longer agrees with you, or gluten or grains, just thinking outside the box, processed sugars. I know it's not sexy, but the way to find the reframe is always to reflect on, I'm removing X food because it no longer serves me. You can find other things to do to satisfy that urge. Trust me. There's a lot of things that I had to change about my diet. And so really touching on menopause, the same things apply. We're less stress resilient. We've got to manage our sleep, anti-inflammatory nutrition, the right types of exercise so we're maintaining muscle mass. But menopausal women, I find for many of them, fasting is a godsend, meaning they might have done all the things. And it's only now that they're eating less often that they're able to see the shifts and changes in body composition, lab work. So objectively and subjectively, women will start feeling a whole lot better. So I think that it's always in the context of who you are as a bio individual. That's number one. And then what life stage are you in? And then being honest with yourself. If you are a little itty bitty 52-year-old that has no body fat, guess what? I don't want you going overboard with fasting. I don't want you doing the 24, 36, 72-hour fast on the regular. I really don't. However, if you are 52 and you have weight to lose, you're insulin resistant, doing some variation in that schedule can be very, very beneficial. Always in the context of, can you get your macros in? I know Ben and I talked a lot about this in our most recent podcast of why I'm not a fan of certain types of fasting. And a lot of it has to do with, can you get enough of your macros in your feeding window? And this is where I always ask, just be honest with yourself. If one meal a day, if you are a guy and you can get 175 grams of protein in one meal, more power to you. But I find most women can't do that. And so let's be honest with ourselves. What works for us may not work for our best friend, may not work for our sister-in-law. Just figuring out what works best for us is really important.
So important. And that's where you use we have so many different devices available, like HRV from an Oura Ring or an Apple Watch or whatever device. You have it too. Looking at HRV, putting on a continuous glucose monitor. I know you're a fan of that, Cynthia. Looking at your blood sugars, looking at how much deep and REM sleep you're getting. But also even more important than metrics like this is paying attention to the signals your body's communicating to you. On day one, I made the case that symptoms are a gift from the innate intelligence. We have stopped listening to this check engine light. Let's find out, why is it flashing? It's giving you signs. So pay attention to the cues your body's giving to you. I have a couple of questions here, and we'll get a little bit more into protein in a second. I know you're a big advocate of that. Before we do, I want to let those who are VIP students, we have Cynthia for about another 25 minutes. She needs to get off before 1 o'clock. So we have her for about 25 more minutes. I have more questions for Cynthia. But if you're a VIP student, I emailed you about 30 minutes ago with a StreamYard link to get into the StreamYard studio. And you could ask your question either in the private chat of the StreamYard studio, or I would recommend you turn on your camera and we could bring you on the screen so we could see your beautiful face and you could actually ask Cynthia your question directly. So now is your opportunity to get into the studio for the next 20 minutes. We'll get to that in a few more minutes. But question: what if you don't have you're under 35 years old, but you don't have a menstrual cycle for whatever reason? Could you explain some ways to track or maybe use the moon cycling as a way to gauge how much to fast, do keto, etc.?
Yeah. So my first question is always, why don't you have a menstrual cycle, especially if you're under the age of 35? Because there is something that we're starting to see more of, in the past 4 years. We're seeing women who are in early menopause. So it's very different. Let me differentiate this from you have an IUD, you're on oral contraceptives. That's different. But if you are not on any type of hormonal synthetic birth control device, the first question is, why are you not getting a cycle? And I think that this is critically important. Sometimes it can be an autoimmune condition. We are seeing more women, and by this, I mean late 20s, that have just gone into premature ovarian failure. That is devastating. And it's very different if you're 50-ish and you go into menopause, because they're just things you expect. You have to be more conscientious about. But to go 25 more years without sex hormones, that's not a good thing. So let's say you have an IUD. Let's say you are on oral contraceptives. No judgment. I was on the pill for a long time myself before I got married. And that's a whole separate conversation. I can tell you all the things at mass being on that I didn't realize. You can cycle with the lunar calendar. So, if you look at the lunar calendar, it's like the full moon is when you have a menstrual cycle, ideally. Women used to actually cycle with the moon. You could look at it that way, like you'll seed cycle. That's another thing that you could do. Specific types of seeds, and I do talk about this in the book. Is there a lot of research on this? No. Are these things going to be harmful? Absolutely not. Specific types of seeds and specific types of your cycle can be supportive of estrogen versus progesterone. But I find for a lot of women, I'll encourage them, get a calendar out and just note symptoms. Maybe you're a little more tired for a week out of that month. Maybe you have more energy. Maybe your libido is shifting. Maybe, you have a couple days where you're very interested in your partner, or you're just more interested in sex in general. Helping people understand that first and foremost, you mentioned, is the innate intelligence. Get a calendar and write down symptoms. So I find for a lot of women, when they start paying attention, whether it's changes in cervical mucus, libido, energy levels, cravings, etc., that can be very insightful. And then, cycling with the lunar calendar, that's certainly an option, or even considering seed cycling. But let me be very clear. Seed cycling is not supported in a lot of research or much research at all. In fact, when I've talked about it, even I've done some TV segments on this, got a little bit of heat from practitioners. And I said, but it's not going to hurt anyone. So from my perspective, providing, options for people, provided it's not going to hurt them, is beneficial. But if you are part of that minority that is under age 35 and you're very thin, you either had COVID, and I'll be honest with you, we're starting to see some weird aberrancies related to COVID infections. people developing autoimmune conditions and just losing their cycles. And a lot of my colleagues and I are talking about this privately, not publicly yet, because we're trying very hard to make sure that the research is going to be able to support what's going on for these individuals. But you do not want to be a younger woman without menstrual cycles that are not precipitated by a medication or an IUD. So if you fall into that category, you absolutely positively want to figure out our menstrual cycles are a vital sign, just like blood pressure, pulse, temperature, and they need to be taken as seriously as that. I think that we practitioners, healthcare providers, sometimes do a really huge disservice to young women by not talking about that enough. There are birth control pills that essentially will allow you never to have a menstrual cycle.
Yeah.
And then helping women understand that when you're on the pill, your hormones are kept at almost a menopausal level. So a lot of the symptoms that I see in my 50, 60-year-old patients and clients are sometimes the same symptoms that I will hear younger women experience. I'm like, you realize that you are the birth control pill, though preventing pregnancy, and I understand for many individuals that is the primary purpose, is also keeping you at a depleted level of sex hormones. So you're missing out on bone building opportunities. We have peak bone and muscle mass in our 20s, beginning of our early 30s. And so if your sex hormones are kept blunted from your teenage years into your early 30s, you're missing out on a lot of opportunities to build healthy bone. And a lot of these women, the irony is, a lot of these women, their own oral contraceptives, as an example, their hormones are kept so low, they have no desire to have, they have no libido, and they have no desire to have sex. And that's the cruel irony. A drug that's designed to protect women and allow them to make choices then makes them feel like they don't want to do anything. So I just wanted to make sure I mentioned that in terms of cycling, like depending on what camp you fall into. I have a new wool sweater and it's a little itchy. So I'm realizing I'm like itching my neck, itching my back. I'm like, it's a new sweater. I'm like trying to get accustomed to the fact it's a little bit itchy. But having said that, be honest with yourself. Or if you have a loved one that is 25 years old and they just don't have menstrual cycles, that's not normal. And that's something that needs to be evaluated.
Great answer. Fantastic answer. And there's more info in Cynthia's book about what she just referenced as well. So definitely get the book. It's available. Where's the best place to get your book, by the way, Cynthia?
I always say if you can find it in a old-fashioned brick and mortar bookstore, try to support those individuals. I know it's so easy just to go to Amazon or Barnes and Noble or Target. But I always say if you have a great bookstore locally, give them your business. Amazon is making it really hard for a lot of these companies to stay in business. And I hate to think about a world without real bookstores, because it's something that like myself and my children have always loved going to look at books. So
me too. Yeah, me too. When I was a kid, I used to walk into Best Buy and I was all about electronics, and I used to get that dopamine of surge when I walked into a Best Buy, like, oh my gosh. Now I don't get that at Best Buy. I get it in a bookstore. So I love bookstores. We got to support them, especially small business owners, etc. So that's the best way to get the book, Intermittent Fasting Transformation. By the way, Cynthia is a big part of our Keto Camp Academy, especially in the Facebook group. She's in our private community for our Academy students. She's very active in there. She comments, she engages. We appreciate that, Cynthia. But I have a question about the thyroid and fasting. A lot of people say fasting should not be done if you have a thyroid condition, especially if you have a slow thyroid. Is there any truth to that? What are some of the considerations there?
Yeah, I think it's always context, Ben. And for full disclosure, just to let everyone know, I've had Hashimoto's in remission for probably 8 years now. I take medication. If we understand at a cellular level what's going on when we are in a fasted state, we're improving mitochondrial efficiency. Mitochondria are the powerhouses of our cells. When we're looking at cellular health, intermittent fasting can improve that. So always in the context of what is going on. If you are a newly diagnosed hypothyroid patient and you feel like crud, you have no energy, your hair is falling out, you're constipated, your skin's dry, and you're just getting started on medication, please don't add fasting to that regimen. I would say if you are stable on medication, you feel good, you're sleeping well, you have plenty of energy, then absolutely intermittent fasting can be beneficial. But again, always in the context of what is going on in your menstrual cycle. Are you sleeping? How's your stress management? I find for a lot of individuals that the mindset is, whether you're male or female, if a little bit of fasting is good, more is better. And this is certainly one of those instances where I always say the caveat is, like, let's be honest. I think for a lot of people, their Hashimoto's is not well controlled. Their antibodies are through the roof. They're not eating a gluten-free diet. They're not being mindful of their nutrition intake. They're not managing their stress. That is the perfect storm for where intermittent fasting could be harmful. However, if the opposite is the case, I think intermittent fasting, just based on the mechanistically what's going on at a cellular level, in many ways, I think that intermittent fasting can be very beneficial for the health of our mitochondria. And so it's always in the context of what is going on with you. If your medication's stable and you feel good, then you can definitely entertain that, depending on where you are in your menstrual cycle, depending on what's going on in your personal life. If you're going through a divorce, you're going through a big move. I had multiple moves a few years ago in the same year while writing a book. Would not recommend doing a lot of fasting under those circumstances. But if you have a lot of extraneous stress, maybe that's the time to back off and do 12 hours of digestive rest. That's a theme that I know everyone is hearing over and over again, that you always have the opportunity to come back to home base. That's a baseline for everyone. You can always come back there if you're starting to have problems. But to suggest, as I know many people do on social media, that intermittent fasting is harmful for the thyroid, I think is really doing a lot of individuals a disservice.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's unfortunate. You hear things like women should not practice intermittent fasting. It's too stressful for women's hormones. And of course, that's not true. I mean, it can be true depending on where you're at. Like Cynthia just made the point there. But that's like saying women should not practice exercising because it's too stressful for them. Well, is it? If they exercise the right amount and they recover, they get healthier and stronger. It helps their hormones. But they do too much exercise and don't recover, then it is bad. So it's all in context. Fasting is a stress to the body, like exercise is a stress to the body. Both could be very beneficial for hormones and inflammation and longevity, as long as we're adapting to the stress. And Cynthia just gave you so many ideas of, are you adapting to the stress, paying attention to different clues and signals your body's giving to you. I do think HRV, heart rate variability, is one of the best gauges to see if you're doing too many stressors. So if you're not tracking your HRV, track it. It's something that I pay attention to. Everybody has a different HRV, so don't compare your scores to somebody else. But for those Keto Camp Academy students, we have modules in the academy that show you how to look at HRV to gauge if you're doing enough stress, doing too much, or not enough, etc. Anything you want to add there before I get to the protein question?
I do.
Okay.
I would also add that we know there are age-adjusted changes in HRV, so I don't expect my HRV to be Ben's and vice versa. Back then, would probably freak out if he saw mine and be like, whoa. But I do know that it can change with travel. Ben and I realized this when we were in Denver last year.
Oh boy.
Ben, my HRV is in the toilet. So I don't expect, I'm a middle-aged person, I don't expect my HRV to be what it would have been at 20 had it been tracking it. But it's also a good indication. I know my HRV is good in the 50s and 60s. If I wake up and it's in the 20s, there's a problem.
Yeah.
It's also kind of a fine-tuned way of getting a sense of, are you having balance in that autonomic nervous system between the sympathetic, which is you're being chased by a saber-toothed tiger, versus the parasympathetic, which is the rest and repose side. Most of us struggle with the sympathetic dominant side. So it's an objective way of looking at that data and saying, okay, I need to clean things up. I usually just realize I need to go to bed earlier. I just need to go to bed earlier. Even during the holidays, my teenagers, my husband can stay up really late. If I do that, my HRV just plummets.
Did you stay up for New Year's Eve? This is the countdown?
The teenagers went out, so I had to stay up because I had to wait for the teenagers to come home. I was up till 11:30, 12. I think at 12, I was I couldn't keep my eyes open and my whole foot had to then stay up. I was not up willingly. It's just, it's very hard for me to fall asleep if the little ducklings are out. They're not so little, but when they're out, trying to explain to them, I don't want you driving on the, so it's just all these extra variables. One is driving, one is not. But just knowing that they're driving when there's all these other things going on, people that are not making good choices, driving after drinking and doing all sorts of things. So not willingly. How about you?
Yeah, same. I mean, I didn't want to, but Natasha, my fiance, for those who don't know, she likes to stay up. We were with her parents, and I was struggling. It was a late dinner, a late night, and the next morning, of course, my HRV took a hit. My scores were crappy, but that's an exception. Like to your point, I usually go to bed early. I don't eat at night. If you could get the majority of your calories earlier in the day, Coach Becky Niles coached on this on Tuesday. You're going to see better scores. You're going to feel better, et cetera. So get those calories earlier on in the day. Are the benefits from what? Let me rephrase this. The benefits of fasting, do they come from eating less often, or do they come from eating less? What's more important?
I think the benefits come from eating less often as opposed to eating less. And more often than not, the CECO people, the calories in, calories out, they'll say, oh, all intermittent fasting is CECO. And that always it used to bother me more than it does now. And now I'm like, this is just an opportunity to help them understand that there are things that go on with intermittent fasting that are beyond just caloric restriction. And a lot of that has to do with, eating less often, changes in hormonal regulation, changes in autophagy. I'm sure the community is already very familiarized with autophagy. And there was a podcast I was listening to this morning that I'll have to pass along to you, where there was a physician talking about benefits that go on with peptide therapies and autophagy. It was fascinating. I was like, wow, this is completely a different way of thinking about things. But for the benefits of individuals that think about fasting and they're like, oh, it's just caloric restriction. No, actually, it's way more than that. And
way more, yeah.
I think that I would be the first person to say it's less about what you're eating and more about how infrequently you're eating. And for a lot of individuals, they'll find that if they just count calories, if they just keep track of every morsel they put in their mouths and they restrict, but yet they're still having this like wide feeding window, or they're still eating inflammatory foods. I think for a lot of individuals, it's not until they experience the benefits. For me at this stage of life, as an example, so much less bloating, so much less digestive issues if I'm not eating within 3 to 4 hours before bed, if I'm having, a first meal of the day at 10 or 11 a.m. and then a second one later in the afternoon by 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon, way different than just going back to the almighty calorie, because we all acknowledge, and even Dr. Robert Lustig talks about this, it's just a unit of measurement, but we've gotten to the point where we just apply it to everything we do. We think that, the packaging that says, this serving is 150 calories, a lot of that's off. I mean, it's just not nearly as scientific as people would like to believe it is. Or, I'm sure you probably did this, Ben, years ago, you'd be on a cardio machine in the gym and it would tell you, okay, you need to walk this many miles to work off, these 5 things. And our bodies are so much more attuned to that. Like, as an example, the more muscle mass we have, the more calories we burn at rest. Very different than thinking about it as I have to walk 5 miles every day to burn off that Twinkie. I don't even know why the Twinkie just blew out of my mouth. I'm just thinking of something outrageous. It is vegan though, right, Ben?
Yes. And shelf stable as well.
Correct. Shelf stable is what scares me. So I think from a lot of different perspectives, there are a lot of people in the health and wellness space that are still diehard CECO advocates. And I tell people all the time, it's not that calories don't matter. It's that hormones matter more. There's a lot more at play that interacts with the caloric consumption of things. I mean, let me be clear, if you eat 2 gallons of ice cream, that's a lot of calories, right? But if you ate the 2 gallons of ice cream and then took 2 or 3 days and didn't eat again, that's so there's different ways that you can look at it. But I think that the caloric focus is too simplistic and doesn't take into account muscle mass, doesn't take into account a lot of factors that impact how our body is able to effectively utilize and effectively, allow our metabolism to hum along efficiently or inefficiently.
Yeah, we could spend hours talking about this, right? There's so many flaws with just focusing on calories. And to Cynthia's point, it's not that we say calories don't matter. We're just saying like we're denying the role of calories. We're saying they're not the most important thing to focus on. They're really not. They're more of a distraction. There are so many variables that come into play when it comes to our body's basal metabolic rate and when we're eating and whether we burn a certain amount of calories or not. You make the point that when you're eating more protein, you'll burn more calories. When you're in ketosis, you'll raise your basal metabolic rate too because you're creating more energy as well. When you're stressed, there's going to be the opposite effect. So one of the biggest red flags is if a practitioner is just having you focus on calories in versus calories out. That is a big red flag that they're stuck with this old, outdated model of weight loss, which does not work long term. It's a model that we need to get rid of. And I know Dr. Fung is always like huge on debunking that. I want to take a minute to share something with you as we take a break from the video you're watching. You know, one of the most common things I see to why people don't have enough energy levels, they have trouble building lean muscle mass, they have brain fog, fatigue, and they don't feel good is because of a deficiency in a hormone called testosterone. Now, testosterone is a very important hormone to have in a healthy amount for both men and for women. So how do you reclaim your vitality? How do you reclaim this very important fat burning and muscle building hormone? Well, you can do it with a powerful supplement called Upgraded T. It has been my go-to for naturally elevating testosterone levels. Upgraded T is from Upgraded Formulas, and it contains the highest quality of ingredients that have been proven scientifically to increase testosterone production. Now, as I mentioned, if you're a woman watching this, this is very important for you just as a man watching this right now. Upgraded T is a natural and safe way to boost testosterone levels. When you boost testosterone levels, it's going to increase your sex drive, vitality. It could help replace fatigue with all-day energy. It'll help you lose that stubborn belly fat. Testosterone is required for fat burning, so it'll help you with the last 5 to 10 pounds that you're looking to lose. It helps you be in a better mood, helps with your memory and focus. So here's the 3-step approach. Step 1, take 2 capsules of Upgraded Tea with water every morning. It does not break your fast. You can have it with food or without food. Step number 2, notice your energy levels and dominate your day with more confidence and more vitality. Step number 3, wake up the next day having better sleep and just keep doing what you're doing. As simple as that. So if you want to get your hands on Upgraded Formulas, Upgraded Tea, and any of their awesome products like their Upgraded Magnesium and their hair mineral analysis testing kit, head over to upgradedformulas.com. And if you use the coupon code KETOSIS at checkout, they're going to give you 15% off your entire order. That is upgradedformulas.com. Ketosis at checkout. We're going to drop that link down below. And let's get back to today's video. We have 5 minutes with you, and Susie just joined the VIP studio. So Susie, give me a thumbs up if you want to ask Cynthia Thurlow. Oh, look at that streamer giving me a thumbs up. Okay, I'm gonna bring on Susie. She's gonna ask you a question. Let's keep in mind we have only 5 minutes here. So Cynthia, I'll make sure we get you off. Don't worry. So here is Susie checking in from Tampa. Hey, Susie.
Hi, Ben. Hi, Cynthia. I just bought your book. I bought it on Amazon. I feel really guilty now because I
don't feel guilty.
Thank you. But so my question is, I am going to be 53 next month, and my cycle's crazy, but I still have it, so I'm not in menopause. And every time I try to go like hardcore keto and do intermittent fasting, it's not amazing. So what I started doing was stop eating like at 4:30, 5 o'clock, and then I don't have my next meal until the morning. That seems to be better, but is that still intermittent fasting? And is that part of what's causing craziness for me right now?
Well, I guess the question is, tell me more about if you're doing a ketogenic diet and intermittent fasting. Tell me what's happening, because you were saying you don't feel good. Is it you're tired? Is it your cycle gets more wonky? Is it that it disrupts your sleep? What's going on?
I mean, I laughed out loud when you did the crime scene thing, and I was like, whoa. My husband heard that and chuckled in the background. He's like, that's dark. And I was like, yeah, I don't know what's happening. So yeah, it's very, I mean, I'm almost 53. So,
I mean, you're probably very likely, like if we were to draw an FSH, the follicular stimulating hormone, if that's over 20 or 25, you're very close. So at 53, you're probably at the tail end of perimenopause. And this is when women sometimes will start having all sorts of new symptoms. If you're still having very heavy cycles, it could be that you have relative estrogen dominance to low progesterone. This is a really good time to have a conversation with your GYN or your internist and ask them, like, would it be appropriate for me to have progesterone the second half of my cycle? It can be life-changing for a lot of women. Do you have trouble sleeping?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So you need some physiological. And progesterone, like you can start at 100 milligrams. I mean, and I don't want anyone to ever take away from anything that you hear me say. I am very pro what works best for you. I do think it's important to understand what's going on physiologically. So less circulating progesterone from the ovaries, your adrenals step in so you become less stress resilient. But if your sleep is wrecked, adding in intermittent fasting on top of that, I would say let's fix the sleep first. So if it's starting with, your let's say your internist, your GYN is willing to prescribe progesterone, great. And it's generic. It's very inexpensive. It gets more complicated when people want compounded stuff. But that's irrelevant. But I would say let's get your sleep fixed first. If you feel good right now, going from 4 o'clock in the afternoon until 8 o'clock in the morning the following day, yes, you've got some degree of intermittent fasting that's ongoing. And for some people, they actually do better eating earlier in the day, meaning we're more insulin sensitive during the day. And as we are navigating perimenopause and menopause, we're losing insulin sensitivity. So, you may very well feel great doing exactly that. And I think that's fine. I would say just make sure you're not going too low on the carbs, because for some people, they are just much more sensitive. Like if you said to me, I'm consuming 75 grams of carbohydrates a day, that's not too low. But if you said I'm trying to do 30, and that's
like 20.
Yeah, that might be impactful.
And I go into ketosis like hardcore fast. So
probably don't need, I would say liberalize your carbohydrates a little bit, especially if you're at a healthy weight, you're already lean, you're insulin sensitive. But I would say at a minimum, get some progesterone because that will help the heavy cycles. It'll help you sleep. And for a lot of people, they just don't realize that the anxious feelings they're having and feeling kind of sad is a byproduct in this loss of progesterone. So though it can fix multiple things all at once.
Okay, that's great. Thanks.
Thank you, Sylvie.
Thanks, Ben. That's all.
Hi. Great question. Great coaching, Cynthia. Cynthia's got to go. Progesterone is great. By the way, I just did 90 days of carnivore, and for 30 of those 90 days, I actually took progesterone, 50 milligrams in the morning and 50 in the evening, just to see how I would feel with it. And actually, I enjoyed it. I liked it. So men can take it too. And from my research,
More about that.
Yeah, we'll talk more about that. From my research, there's no negative feedback loop for progesterone. Is that correct? Meaning if you take it, your body doesn't shut it down?
No, although it's interesting because my functional medicine doc and I are always having these convoluted conversations. And he feels like if you have too much progesterone on board, it can raise cortisol. I think, at 50 milligrams, I'm not really worried about that. I do see a lot of women that are on 200, 300, 400 milligrams of progesterone, and that can be too much for them. You can get some disruption in cortisol, but I think at that amount, I'm not about it.
And I just did it for 30 days too. So
that's so cool.
Yeah, we'll talk more about that. You got to run, but share with those watching, where's the best place to go check you out, Cynthia?
I would say my website, so www.cynthiathurlow.com. You can find information on my book, my podcast, which is, as Ben knows, one of my favorite things I do in my business, Everyday Wellness. Ben's been a guest 4 or 5 times, many, many times. You can connect with me on YouTube. I've got a growing YouTube channel. I'm active on Instagram. I'm a little snarky on Twitter or X. And I do have a free Facebook group called Intermittent Fasting Lifestyle / my name. There are men and women in that group. It is a drama-free zone. So don't at all be concerned. Like I actually moderate. I'm going to moderate for as long as I can. Like my team knows I like being very hands-on. But I'd love for you to reach out. Let me know how you got connected, if you were part of Ben's challenge, and that's how you started following us.
Thank you, Cynthia. We'll put all that down below. Have an amazing rest of your day. We'll talk later. Thank you for your time today. Bye, Cynthia.